settings. So, okay. Like I said, how to shield an IoT product from the OWASP top 10. About me, basically, probably like most of you here, I'm a hacker. I try to break. I actually normally do the break side, not the builder, but I do both. I do trainings, and on my free time, I like to do a lot of karate and slacklining. So when I'm not sitting in front of a computer, if you want to reach me, Twitter, LinkedIn, you can find me. It's easy. Okay, about my company. Well, a couple of years ago, I've been working as a freelancer for a long time, and a couple of years ago, I decided, okay, let's try to get it bigger, and founded a small company. And we do basically IoT security as the main thing. Since this is a non-commercial mode, if there's students among you, we're having a class on IoT security bootcamp in Cologne, and we're giving up 2 spaces for students. So if anybody knows a student that wants to participate and come to learn for free, please give them the information. We'd love to have them. All right. So what I'm going to talk about. Basically, we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction to make sure we're all on the same page about IoT, the architectures, and the simple stuff. Then we're going to move into IoT security. So what's the current status, attack surfaces, maybe some design principles. After that, we're going to jump into the OWASP IoT top 10, a little bit about the project, the list that came out, and how you can use it and how you can test for it. And if we have time, I timed the track last night, it should work, but if we have time, we can go interactively through some use cases together. More of a discussion. Okay, so IoT, hands up who knows about IoT and does home automation and stuff like that. Any of you do security for IoT? All right, 3, 4 in the room. Okay, good. All right, so I don't have to tell you, IoT is basically the Internet of Things. That's what it stands for. And it is a collection of interconnected objects. And I think we already had that in the internet. We have everything connected, distributed. What makes it different is that we have interactions with the physical world. So you normally have sensors and actors that are actually doing stuff and picking up information from the real world. So they're transforming analog data into digital data and actioning stuff. Normally use it for automation, monitoring, data collection, whatnot. In IoT, we're IT people who tend to put things into categories and, put things in boxes so we know what they are and label them. IoT is not different. There's different labels and stuff, mostly because of the use cases and the technologies involved. So there's a whole bunch of them. The 3 I see the most is consumer IoT, which is basically anything you use that as an end user. So thermostats, smartwatches, smart plugs, maybe your TV, kettle, egg tray, the works. I tend to put automotive into a separate category because it's just different technologies and there's a lot of more safety rules in place for that. And then you can, another big box would be industrial IoT, where they have, for example, there's been a big boom on smart seating, so smart parking lots and, irrigation system from the cities and controlling traffic. You can maybe put in your ICS or industrial control system, SCADA, or maybe your smart grids and stuff like that into that category. So IoT, it's not the question of when it's getting big, it's already getting there. It doesn't matter where you get your data from and how many devices people say you have. The important thing is that it's going up. The amount of devices being connected is going up. It has a hockey stick curve, right? So the exact number of billions and where you get it is not the important thing. The important thing is to know it's here and it's growing. It's going to be a bigger part of our lives every day. And everything's getting connected, and even stuff that shouldn't. So, for example, we ran into a Alexa connected toilet seat. Not necessarily something you really need. There was a use case for that, but most people don't really need it. If you're bored someday at work or something like that, take a look at this Twitter account, Internet of Shit. They find a whole bunch of shit that's connected that maybe shouldn't be. Okay, so we know about IoT. So IoT is actually pretty complex. And the reason because of that is that you have always different layers and different things working into it. The first layer we'll talk about is normally have your devices, your sensors, or your things. And these are based on, they have a hardware component and then they have software running on them. The software that's running on these devices is normally called firmware. It's normally stripped down of operating system. It's down to the bones, but yeah, it's primary nonetheless. Next thing you have is communication protocols, so how these things connect to the rest of the world and how they talk between each other. In some cases, you have something like a gateway. So a typical example of your gateway would be the Philips Hue, right? Because it has something that bridges between the networking world and the wireless communication protocols or the wired communication protocols you have in on your sensors and on your actors. After that, you have somewhere where you collect all your data, that everything goes in, and you typically have a visualization, application, and action layer on top of that. Another way to look at it, a little more of the same, but shuffled differently. You have your device hardware with, systems on chips or MCU, sensors, actors. You have your firmware, connectivity, and you normally have some sort of mobile application because everybody wants an app to control everything. You have a web application because you have to enroll your users and be able to, track them and bill them for stuff. And, most of the stuff actually works because you have APIs and backends, pumping the blood of the system. So, since you have that big stack, we have to deal with all the complexity, the interactions, and all of the weaknesses of each of these layers independently if you want to make IoT secure. So you have to, look at them all together and each layer separately to make sure that you have what we normally call defense in depth. And that brings us into the security of IoT. So any questions so far before I keep on going? So this is supposed to be interactive? All right. Okay, so the S in IoT stands for security. It's a running joke on the internet. Actually, it's sad but true. It's not secure. Lots of the devices are not being secured. And yeah, you can find lots of comments like this where, all your devices are ransoming you to pay someone for them to work. So, quick status of what we've seen over the testing and working over the last couple of years is that most IoT devices are not secure. The main reason for that, especially, it doesn't matter if it's consumer or enterprise, the main reason for that, especially on the consumer IoT side, is because they have a quick time to market, right? All the competition already has a device. We have to have one as well. So you have your connected barbecue, you have your power tools, everything has an app on it, and we need to do it as well. And it has to be cheap. So if anybody who's worked in security, doing things quickly and cheap doesn't mean it's good for security. Normally security is neither cheap nor quick. It takes time to do stuff right. There's a whole bunch of marketplaces, and IoT environments. There are just too many of them, and most of them are not secure. The main reason for that is that they don't define their security requirements. So if you don't set the bar, nobody can try to meet it. Even if the bar is low, take for example the first versions of PCI, it was not the best, but at least someone was setting something that you would have to aim for. If you're not doing that, you're not going anywhere. And then, most of the time, the platform providers and the end users are the ones end up paying for the security. So maybe the platform providers, you have a mobile carrier or something like that, they're actually paying for the outage before they, hopefully they're paying for the outage before they take a new device into their portfolio. And they're paying, if the device gets hacked, they're paying with their reputation getting, smacked on the yellow pages. And, the end users suffer the attacks. Right, because if the device is not secure, it's a cheap device, you get hacked, it's your data, it's your smart home that doesn't work. So at the end, you're actually paying for that the wrong way. Okay, so like I said, consumer IoT, you got cheap devices, quick time to market, and lots of these devices end up being disposable because after a year or so, the Chinese guy who built it doesn't want to support it anymore. Maybe they turn off the cloud or they go broke, and you end up with pay per holder. On the enterprise side of things, what we have is a whole bunch of people closing their eyes and saying, we work with proprietary protocols. Nobody knows what we're doing, so we're safe. Security by security. Or we're just using binary protocols. Nobody can understand that. Yeah, right. Okay, then you have, if you go deeper into operational technologies, you have a bigger problem. Most of these systems were built a long time ago, and they are built to be running for at least 15 to 20 years. They're not going to turn them off before that because accounting they have to write it off. And that's how the accounting works. That's how those systems were built up too. So that's actually a big problem. Lots of them they say, no, we don't need to secure it because we're not sending personal information over the wires, over the air. It's just sensor data. What could happen with that? Or, we're using network technology X, and that means it's secure, but they didn't check. Most of them forget even to turn on the encryption, all the security options they have on that protocol. So, yeah. And of course, the typical excuse, everything happens behind our firewall, so we're secure. We don't have to worry about anything. And actually, in the OT world, IoT is turning into like a shadow infrastructure. Like the same thing happened with the cloud services at the beginning with AWS, because people want the data they have and want to be able to monitor their systems. And if they go through the normal OT way, they're not going to be able to get anything done because these guys don't know the technology and say, no, this is too dangerous. So lots of companies are actually buying small solutions. They're kind of SIM card connected, maybe a Raspberry Pi, connecting and collecting data off their infrastructures, and they're not telling IT about it. Okay, so what's really sad is that we're actually recycling bugs and errors from the past. So we're like back into the 90s. We should have learned about these things, with time, but we're using, you see a lot of clear text protocols, so, people forget to turn on SSL or stuff like that. Well, mostly the excuse is we don't have the power to do it, but most of the chips that you use already have encryption baked into hardware. It may be not the best encryption ever, but it's better than plain text. And they have problems with authentication and trust management, and of course, non-mature stacks. Okay, so why don't we just, build them secure by design? We should have thought about that before. But this is actually the best option if someone calls, the security expert in when they're on the drawing board. It will actually save you a lot of time and money. There's studies out there. Normally, you will save between 10 and 20 times as much money as when you have the product out on the field and you have to bolt security back onto it. But and if you do that, of course, remember the basic security principles. So secure all your data. If it's in motion or in rest, make sure you do secure defaults. If you have encryption possible, keep it on when stuff like that. You make sure you use least privileges. So don't run everything on the device as root, for example, and only give the different roles the access they need for stuff to work. Make sure you trust but verify. So typical example of this would be SSL, right? If you're doing SSL with certificates, please check that the certificate on the other side is actually, what it should be and not just assume it's right. Use secure components. So when you build stuff, make sure that you can update these things and that the components you're using are being patched and actively maintained. Don't just, import a whole bunch of JavaScript libraries and let them sit there. Allow upgrades and factory resets. So if someone takes your device and wants to sell it on eBay, you want to make sure that, his Wi-Fi password gets wiped off when he tries to sell it. Of course, make sure you do default and death and define security requirements. So these things can actually work. So we didn't do security by design. We're bolting it down on something that's already out the door. How do we do it? So this is actually what you normally get confronted with. The rabbit's already out of the hat. The product's being sold, or maybe, typical thing you probably all know the feeling. The week before this goes into launch, they call in the pen testing team, and you get a report this big. And oh no, wouldn't the risk? How would he manage it so it actually can get launched? The real answer is you have to measure your risk. Probably you're not going to be able to convince your marketing department to delay the launch for 6 months to fix it, so you're going to have to live with it. Because there's no quick way to bolt security onto it. And being realistic, it will take you a couple of releases. Hopefully you have an agile and software releases and you can update it so you can fix the stuff on the run. Since there's no easy solution for it, how do we actually do it? There's a couple of ways. One thing what you could do is a risk-based approach, or you can do a full-blown analysis. If you're doing a good analysis, it would also take you some time, so no quick solutions. So if you're doing your security assessment, the first thing you probably want to do, like always, find the attack security surface, preferably do some threat modeling analysis and some risk assessment. If you don't know what threats you can use, this is where your OWASP top 10 list come into play. You can always get inspiration and see, what attacks are out there and what do I have to actually think about if you haven't done this before. Once you did that, you can define what things you actually want to test, see if if it holds its water, do some security testing, some pen testing, and then fix the issues. And this is a rinse and rewash for every release because, stuff will pop up along the way. When you're fixing issues, it's important to prioritize because, you're going to have a big list of things you want to go through. And you want to make sure that you cover the things you can fix quickly. Maybe they're not the biggest one, but, you get them off your table and they're done. And you want to look for things that give you the biggest impact. So the ones that actually carry the highest risk. And if you don't know how to decide, you can always go through the OWASP IoT top 10 list because they actually show you the 10 things that are more common and have the biggest impact. And once you do that, just do a little dance and be happy because you did something good on your day. Okay. So to go a little bit deeper on how you do these things, the first thing you want to do is talk about your attack surface. What I tend to do is I split it down to 4 categories. You take basically based on the technology and what's going in there and the know-how. So what you need to know to be able to attack these things. You want to look at everything that's on the device itself. So all your hardware-related things, are your interfaces there? Can you exploit it? What information can you pull out of the device? Because it's not in your control. You sold it. So if it's an enterprise IoT, it's probably maybe put on a mast and a pole 10 meters high. But if it's consumer IoT, it's probably on someone's wrist. And, they can do whatever they want with it at home. Firmware-based vulnerabilities, what can you reverse engineer out of it? If there's a backdoor, stuff like that. I put into, classical security, I put all into one typical bucket because, mobile web infrastructure is stuff that most of the security people know about. And then I put into another bucket everything that has to do with radio and wireless communications. Okay. So once you figured out what other buckets, then you start doing your threat analysis. The important thing to do for that is that you always look at the big picture. So don't just focus on one device. Don't just focus on your use case. Zoom out and make sure that in your threat analysis, you take a look at everything that's in that ecosystem to make the things work. From the network to the DNS and everything in there. So the first thing you want to do is you want to build the diagram, high level design of all the things, and then you can zoom in as you go. So, start with a bird view and then go down into the details and do a couple of iterations. You identify all your components. For example, you have a gateway, a mobile app, cloud services, and then you take a look at how these interact with each other. Normally, you have to look at the security details on each of these things and then look at all the trust boundaries. So what is happening between these different devices? And then, pick your favorite methodology to do this. You can maybe use Stride or VAST. So you'll try to look and see, what happens if someone impersonates the device. Can he use the credentials he picks off of the device to connect to the dashboard or to connect to whatnot? This will also take a while, but it will, if you haven't done it before, it will teach you a lot about your product. And try to involve the developers and the engineers and the architects who did this because, they know the product better than you from the security point of view. So enable them to help you do this. They know the product a lot better than you and they know how it works. So, once you did this, you did your testing, you figured out stuff. How do you fix stuff? So it's really hard to find to define the priorities. You can always go for the quick wins. So, hands up, who remembers the Jeep attacks that, Charlie Miller and Sorts did? Okay, so not that many. So basically, Jeep had a vulnerability on their systems and they got remote control of a Jeep. So the Jeep was running on the highway. They did a video. Look it up on YouTube. It's actually pretty fun. The reporter who did the reporting didn't know that they were going to hack his Jeep. He knew they were going to hack his Jeep, but he didn't know how. So he was just driving on the highway and then someone, tuned up the radio, put on the blinkers, and they actually turned off his car in the middle of the highway. So he was not really, having fun in that moment. This comes into play because of the quick win. So this thing was connected via GSM. And the biggest quick win that Jeep pulled off there is they didn't ask for client isolation in that APN. That means anybody who had a SIM card on that network using the same APN could connect to any other car, so any other device that's connected in that network, and talk to it. And that's how they pulled off the attack. So the quick win was actually calling up the provider, like, can you turn that off? And that's called client isolation. That means remote attacks don't work anymore because you can't access the network. So that's what quick wins can do a lot for you, and they tend to be really easy. So it was 5 minutes with a mobile provider on the phone, and the problem was off the table. No reconfiguration, no rolling out new software, done. And then after you fix those things, you can take a look at the highest impact, and there's where your IoT top 10 comes in handy. Okay, so the shortcut is to use the top 10 list. You can just test for these, so the things that are on this list, and review the list, and maybe go with engineers and ask them if they actually did things related to that list. Normally, they will look up with big eyes and say, no, we didn't think about that. And you fix it very quickly. This does not replace your regular security process, so I'm not recommending you to do only this, but this will, it will shorten your cycle and get you working, and then you can do the best in the back. Okay, so the IoT project is basically, one of the OWASP projects focused on IoT. Last year, so December of last year, they came out with an updated list of all the things you should test. And you can see, start a list. We can get some more hard-coded passwords, network security services. So we'll go through the list one by one. So, we can get some more passwords, your typical backdoors, how you test for this and do stuff. You can do brute force attacks and dictionary tasks. If you're doing this on a device, make sure to, reduce the amount of threads and stuff you have. Because if you hit a small device with a little CPU with your big laptop, Hydra with 10 threads, you're going to kill it. It can't handle that many requests. So normally you have to tune it down to maybe one thread and give it some time to breathe between all the password attempts. Then the other thing you can do is maybe pull out the firmware, search for strings, and if you know how to use IDA or JIDRA, you can just try to reverse engineer it and see how it's doing stuff. But normally if you look for strings, you'll find a lot of things. Remember that the strings tool in Linux, it looks for strings that are longer than 4 characters. So if someone has a password 1, 2, 3, you won't find it with strings. And of course you can just, Google the default password for that device. So, just look for it and you will probably find it and it will probably work. Insecure network services, I think we all know about it. You can just man the middle attacks or port scans, vulnerability scans, and you will find services that are there that shouldn't be. Insecure network interfaces and basically is, we talked about that you had web interfaces, APIs, mobile interfaces, maybe have an MQTT queue, and these things are exposed to the internet and they're not secured. So one of the things you can see a lot on, for example, with MQTT queues is that the device is allowed to change configuration of other devices, so he can write on the queue where you do the configurations instead of just being able to read stuff. So yeah, make sure you do go into your normal OWASP testing for all of these devices and don't reinvent the wheel. Lack of secure updating. This actually can be pretty fun because, lots of the devices, you give it a firmware and it say, okay, I'll install it. So it will let you brick the device in the best case, or it will let you run your own private firmware on it. There's actually in consumer IoT for smart homes, stuff like that, there's actually a couple of manufacturers who are embracing this because they've noticed people want to buy the devices, to run their own systems on it. And they're allowing you to do it. And, actually, they have doubled or tripled their sales because of that. Because, there's a whole bunch of communities writing their own firmwares for those devices. So no, they sell it out with their own crappy, firmware on top, and you can you can build the open source projects and put it into that. So how you test for this and normally do it, you just review the upgrade process, see what's going on, maybe sniff the traffic, see if there's actually some validation, is the packet signed or whatnot. You can sniff it and, reverse engineer it. Insecure and outdated components. Everybody has seen this. If you've ever done a pen test or something like that, you can, or, just open browser with the right plugin. It will tell you, look, this is running this old jQuery version that, it's vulnerable or stuff like that. If you build a device or build a system make a bill of materials. So keep track of the libraries you're using and all the different components you're using. Then you can feed that into OWASP dependency check. It will give you a heads up if whatever component you're using is vulnerable. And if you already have a big component out of the door, there's a whole bunch of commercial tools like Black Duck, Checkmark, and the Nut that take that, they dissect your product and give you the heads up. Insufficient privacy protections, personal identify information on device and on the ecosystems. You can dump the Wi-Fi password, for example, has to be stored somewhere. Normally it ends up in the EEPROM flash disk. So if you dump that, you'll probably find it. They should encrypt it or, obfuscate it somewhere to make it harder, but it has to be stored somewhere. And there's lots of stuff stored in the mobile apps as well. We know about this, insecure data transfer, so make sure you have encryption at rest and in transit. Lack of device management. This is more for the enterprise areas where you have to track which devices are out there, which versions are running, and how do you decommission them. And this you probably find this out with a little bit of typical asking some questions in an audit. Insecure defaults. Typical your hard-coded passwords. Maybe you go through some hardening checks, port scans, and whatnot. And, even though this is the most fun part, it's number 10, which is lack of physical hardening, because it normally affects just that device that you have in your hands and not the whole ecosystem. But this is fun. You can take the device apart. You look for device interfaces, so serial interfaces or JTAG interfaces, and then you can use nifty hardware like this. For example, this is a bus pirate, or you can actually there's lots of stuff like JTAG enum that you can just run on a normal Arduino and be able to connect to the devices. Okay. To sum it all down, IoT is getting complex. You have a really big attack surface because you have devices, firmware, radio communications, app, web infrastructure, network security. It's important. Plan it in advance. Try to put it into your designs. If you're doing stuff like this, don't reinvent the wheel. There are security frameworks and requirement frameworks you can follow. For example, the IoT Security Foundation has a pretty good one that's really broad. It's not only technical. It allows you to go through different things. Or you can use the different OWASP lists for each of the areas. Make sure you test for that, and test for the different OWASP top 10 lists. So if it has a web component, use a web one. Of a mobile, use a mobile one. And remember not to recycle bugs and repeating the mistakes of the past. And now I think we can go back into questions or a discussion. I brought some use cases, but I think will depend on the time if we go through them.
We have 10 minutes left for questions, so I don't know how many slides do you have.
I can use the use cases can be 10 minutes or it could be an hour, so it doesn't matter. So,
okay.
Questions, anyone? Comments? Give me a second to bring the mic.
You referenced the Jeep hack, right? So, I mean, it was an interesting hack, but in reality, it wasn't really. I mean, it was bad security from the point of view of Jeep, but the problem didn't lie with Jeep itself. The problem lied and still lies with some telco operators, specifically American telco operators, that don't do network isolation. So like the Jeep hack, you could have never really done in Europe because network telco operators here in Europe do client isolation by default, right? So you wouldn't have been able to get into that network anyway. So my comment is, it's like there's two parts to this problem, right? There's the actual device versus the infrastructure that the device depends on. And sometimes we tend to forget that part, right? We don't look at the whole chain of things. If we focus strictly on the device security, we're potentially missing something over here, right? On the other side of the scale.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Take a look at the whole ecosystem. Don't focus on the device. Make sure you see the whole ecosystem from 10,000 feet, the bird view, so you have all of your components in your view and don't forget something. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the nice presentation. I was very glad that you made the distinction between consumer and industrial IoT, because they are very different. But my question is, for example, as security people, we love to shit on home automation, for example, and make fun of people who do stuff in an automated way using IoT, but it's a very valid use case and it can make life much easier for a lot of people, especially, for example, old people or people with special needs. So it's very important, something that a lot of us can even relate to or see like something that they could use in their parents' home or in their own home as well. So in this case, where you need to build a solution, you can't really use the OWASP 10 in a sense, because you don't really have time to sit and analyze the frameworks yourself or do all that process. An industrial user might have all the resources and the money and everything to do this process. What kind of stuff, like a normal consumer can do, for example, to make sure that the Google Home or Alexa or whatever that's born in their grandparents' house and doing some automated tasks does not pose a security threat to their own like life or something like that by someone just hijacking and starting flipping the lights on and off all time?
Okay, so yeah, thanks for the question. So actually the best thing you can do is make conscious decisions and invest your money in people who have a good track record, right? So if the device costs €5 off the internet, including shipping from China, you know that nobody took a look at security, right? It's just true. Nobody took a look at that. They just packed it and shipped it. So the only thing you can do is actually, I know there's a project, I think it's Peter Beer, he's working on a trustable project. So the idea is that the companies actually have to publish some sort of a self-assessment of the things they're doing for the IoT, for their IoT devices. I hope that picks up. I think it's a project financed by the Mozilla Foundation. So I hope that picks up, because then if you're going to buy something, you can look up, did they actually publish something or they didn't? So if they didn't, they either don't know or they don't care. So at the end, your money talks, right? Try to invest in things that you think that will be better. And at the end, the end user can't do much more than that, because they don't have the know-how to, pick the device apart and do the reverse security. And actually, yeah, the point you said about elderly people and smart homes, it's actually a good way to improve their quality of life, right? I think I was a talk the other day. I think it was Andy, and he has a system in place for his parents. For example, he has a whole bunch of sensors in. For example, he has a sensor under the mat by the bed. So if his mom hasn't gotten up in the morning and pressed on that sensor by 10 in the morning, he knows she's sick. So he just gives her a simple call. Hey, mom, how are you doing? And she will think, I'm having the flu and stuff like that. So it's not invasive, but it gives him a system to be able to support his mom who doesn't want to go into a facility.
To quickly pick up on the point about the ecosystem being important, I think that's true, but it's also that there are a lot of weak links, right? So, for example, even if the vulnerability for the Jeep was not exploitable in Europe, it's just an entry point into a part of the system that has no defense in the depth. So they couldn't exploit it with some feature of the mobile network, but maybe it doesn't matter if you find something else to get into that. So Bluetooth or something else to take over the head unit. So I think the problem is that a lot of these things depend on other things being secure, but they are not secure by themselves, right? So, and that's one of the biggest problems.
There's actually, I saw a use case on automotive security, and they hacked the head unit using the radio. So the DAB radio hacked the system, and that was connected to the CAN bus, so they pushed the exploit through the digital radio. So, yeah. It's not just the client isolation. I think here, another question?
So it's going to be the last question, then we will finish.
It's more of a comment than a question, if that's okay. But I think a lot of people don't realize how common this is in real life. I was talking to our chief architect, and he was telling me how he was driving his Volvo when the dashboard went from Swedish to Chinese all of the sudden, and then flipped back to Chinese, and I never got in the car with him again after that. But it's very common, and the light systems everywhere. You can get very paranoid very quickly, thinking about all the stuff that's really insecure around you. But I think the project is a really good start to like having some common ground or some kind of shared understanding on how to move forward. So thank you for the nice presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Pablo, and I guess we can go to the next talk. Thanks.